handbag. Ancient Sumerians were more than familiar with handbags, or perhaps objects that modern people perceive as such.
It looks like a handbag, not a pouch, not a sack, not a primitive cloth bundle tied at the top. A rigid, structured container with a flat base, a curved handle, proportions that are unmistakably deliberate. The kind of object you would not blink at if someone carried it down a modern city street. And it is carved into stone 5,000 years old. It is gripped by beings ancient texts describe as the founders of civilization. Winged figures, eagle-headed figures, fish-bodied figures that emerged from the sea and taught humanity everything. Writing, mathematics, law, agriculture, the entire scaffolding of what we call human progress, handed down by beings who were not quite human, carrying a bag that should not exist. And here is the part mainstream archaeology has never been able to explain away. The bag stays closed. Across 12,000 years of carvings, across 3 continents, in cultures that supposedly never spoke to each other. The beings who carry it never open it, never show what is inside, not once, not anywhere, as if what was inside was never meant to be seen. This is the mystery of the handbag of the gods, and the reason it was kept closed is darker than you think. The image appears first in ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, modern-day Iraq, the cradle of civilization, where the first cities rose, where writing was invented, where human history is supposed to begin. The Sumerians carved it into cylinder seals and temple walls. Their successors, the Akkadians and Assyrians, carved it into the massive stone reliefs that now line the halls of the British Museum. It appears in the most sacred artistic contexts they produced. Scenes of divine ritual, the tree of life, the throne rooms of kings who ruled by the will of the gods. In every one of those scenes, the beings holding the bag are not ordinary priests. They are the Apkallu. The Apkallu were the sages of Sumerian mythology, semi-divine figures described in ancient texts as the ones who arrived after the Great Flood and rebuilt the world. They gave humanity its knowledge base wholesale, not piece by piece, not generation by generation, all at once. Writing, mathematics, architecture, agriculture, law, the complete foundation of civilization, delivered by beings who came from somewhere else. They appear in several forms across Mesopotamian art. Winged men in elaborate robes, eagle-headed figures performing rituals, and the strangest form of all, fishmen. Figures dressed in the full skin of a fish, the animal's head worn like a hood, human hands and feet emerging from beneath it. That last form connects to one of the most unsettling figures in ancient mythology, a being called Oans. According to the Babylonian priest Berossus, drawing on sources far older than his own era, Oans emerged from the Persian Gulf in the deep past. He had the body of a fish. Beneath the fish head was a second head, human. He had human feet beneath the fish tail. During the day he came onto land and taught humanity everything: writing, sciences, city building, law. At night he returned to the sea. Every day, for years, and in almost every depiction of Oans, of the Apkallu, of every version of this being across Mesopotamian art, the hand holds the bag. The official explanation has a name, the bandudu, a ritual bucket used in purification ceremonies. The Apkallu are also shown holding a cone-shaped object in the other hand, interpreted as an applicator for sprinkling water or sacred oil. The bucket held the liquid. The cone applied it. Fertility ritual, nothing to see here. On paper, it holds together. But three things refuse to fit. First, the beings holding these objects are the founders of civilization. They are depicted at the Tree of Life. They appear in the most important sacred spaces the ancient world produced. The question that never gets asked out loud is this: would the beings credited with giving humanity writing and mathematics really be remembered for all of time as bucket carriers? Would the central symbol of the sages who built civilization be a janitor's pail? Second, the object does not look like a bucket. Buckets in ancient art have wide mouths, visible contents. They are clearly containers for liquid. The Mesopotamian handbag has rigid structure, precise proportions, a handle designed for carrying rather than pouring. The shape is wrong for a bucket. It is exactly right for something precious, something portable, something you would never risk spilling. Third, and most damaging, the same symbol appears in places Mesopotamian religion could not possibly have reached, and that is where the mystery stops being regional folklore and becomes something much harder to dismiss. In southeastern Turkey, on a dry hilltop that locals had dismissed for decades as a cemetery, archaeologists uncovered something the standard model of human history cannot accommodate: Göbekli Tepe. Massive stone pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in circles, decorated with sophisticated carvings of animals, abstract symbols, and human figures. A monumental ceremonial complex built with planning, coordination, and technical skill. It is more than 12,000 years old. Read that again, 12,000 years. This predates the supposed invention of agriculture by over 1,000 years. It predates pottery. It predates permanent settlements. It predates everything the standard model requires before humans could build anything like this. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were supposed to be primitive hunter-gatherers, small nomadic bands, stone tools, barely surviving the end of the Ice Age. They should not have had the social organization, the engineering knowledge, or the workforce to raise 20-ton pillars and carve them with precision artwork. And yet, there it stands. Impossible by every measure we thought we understood. And among the carvings on those ancient pillars, researchers have identified the handbag symbol, the same structured container, the same curved handle, the same proportions, carved into stone at least 7,000 years before Sumerian civilization existed. This is not a bandadoo. This is not a ritual bucket from a Mesopotamian purification ceremony. Göbekli Tepe predates that religion by millennia. Whatever this symbol meant to the people who first carved it into those pillars, it had nothing to do with holy water. So what was it? And why, 7,000 years later, did the Sumerians carve the exact same object into the hands of the beings who rebuilt civilization after the flood, as if this symbol had always been part of the story? Leave the Middle East entirely. Cross the Atlantic, travel to ancient Mexico. At the Olmec site of La Venta, there's a stone monument known as Stela 19, carved roughly 3,000 years ago. It depicts a figure in elaborate ceremonial dress, interacting with a feathered serpent, one of the most sacred symbols in all of Mesoamerican religion. And in his hand, he carries the handbag. The Olmec had no contact with ancient Mesopotamia, none. They developed on the opposite side of the world, separated by an ocean that was not supposed to be crossable until thousands of years later. Their writing, their calendar, their religious structure, all independent, all separate. The conventional explanation is coincidence, but that explanation collapses the moment you look at context. The handbag at La Venta is not a bucket for carrying water. It is held by a sacred figure in a sacred scene involving one of the culture's most powerful divine symbols. The same way the Apkallu hold it. The same pose, the same deliberate grip. The Toltec civilization, which came later in Mesoamerica, carved similar containers at the ancient city of Tula. Figures that echo the Mesopotamian Apkallu almost exactly. Divine beings, elaborate dress, the bag at the side. Traveled to New Zealand. In Maori tradition, there is a myth about 3 keta, 3 baskets of knowledge. The god Tain ascended to the highest heaven and obtained them. Each held a different form of wisdom. The baskets were the source of everything the Maori considered sacred knowledge, divine beings, containers, knowledge that founded civilization. In ancient Egypt, the gods are depicted carrying the ankh, the symbol of life, in a grip almost identical to how the Apkallu hold the handbag, the loop at the top, the hand wrapped around it, the same arm position. Some researchers consider this the same image, translated into a different visual language by a different culture. What we are looking at, across multiple continents and multiple millennia, is a pattern. Divine beings associated with the origins of civilization, carrying a distinctive container, in contexts that are always sacred, always tied to knowledge, always connected to the moment human history began. Random cultural coincidence produces random variation. Different symbols, different objects, different shapes. This is not random. This is the same image, repeated precisely across civilizations that had no business sharing it. Either multiple ancient peoples independently invented the same specific symbol for the same specific idea, or there is a connection underneath all of it that the official history refuses to examine. If you are still watching, subscribe now and hit the bell, because the theories about what was inside that bag go places the mainstream will not follow. And the one at the end of this video is the one that should concern all of us the most. 4 theories. They start reasonable and end somewhere most academics will not go on the record. The first theory, a seed vault. The handbag contained preserved seeds and agricultural knowledge. After the catastrophic end of the last ice age, survivors of a global cataclysm would have needed to restart farming in a devastated landscape. A portable container holding the seeds of civilization, the literal biological foundation of agriculture, would have been the single most valuable object on Earth. The timeline fits exactly. Göbekli Tepe was built at the end of the Ice Age, precisely when agriculture was supposedly first emerging. The Apkallu were credited with teaching humanity to farm. If the handbag held what was needed to restart the food supply after a planetary disaster, its sacred status makes complete sense. But some researchers believe what was inside was far more advanced than seeds. The second theory, a power source. Ancient peoples built things the standard model cannot explain. The stone pillars at Göbekli Tepe moved and raised without the technology we assume was required. The precision stonework of Mesopotamian temples built to tolerances modern engineers find surprising. The architectural achievements of cultures we still condescend to. What if those capabilities required a tool? A portable technology that could manipulate matter or energy in ways we do not yet understand. If the handbag was a portable power device, it would explain both its sacred status and its permanent association with the beings who taught humanity to build. They were not just carrying information, they were carrying the means to make it real. The third theory, a genetic toolkit. This is the one that sounds impossible until you read the Sumerian texts carefully. The Sumerian creation myth is specific. The god Enki creates humanity by mixing the blood of a slain god with clay. He shapes a new kind of being, the Lulu, the worker, a creature designed to serve. In the Atrahasis epic and the Enuma Elish, the language used to describe this process sounds less like mythology and more like a procedure. Measuring, mixing, testing, producing a specific biological result. Enki is almost always depicted carrying the handbag. If the Apkallu were beings who had the knowledge to create or modify life, the handbag becomes something else entirely. A biological toolkit, a container for genetic material. The technology used to do what the myths describe. It would explain why the object was so precious that it appears in every sacred scene. Why it is held by the beings who did not just teach civilization, but created the beings capable of receiving it. It would mean the bag was not a symbol of knowledge. It was the source of us. The fourth theory is the one almost no serious academic will discuss on the record. Some researchers have proposed the handbag was a consciousness device. Ancient art across multiple cultures contains what some interpret as explicit references to the pineal gland, the small structure inside the brain that produces DMT and melatonin, that has been associated with spiritual experience in traditions spanning every continent. The cone-shaped object held in the Apkallu's other hand has been interpreted by some as a direct pineal reference. If the handbag contained a technology capable of stimulating or altering human consciousness, the knowledge bringers were not just delivering information. They were upgrading the hardware that receives it. This would explain why the civilizations they touched seemed to emerge suddenly. Not because knowledge was handed down, because the capacity to understand it was switched on. And then there is the theory that sits beneath all the others. What if the beings carrying the handbag were not gods, not extraterrestrials? What if they were human? What if they were the survivors of a civilization that existed before the catastrophe, and the handbag was what they managed to save from it? This idea is no longer the exclusive territory of alternative researchers. The evidence has been building in mainstream science for 20 years, and it is no longer easy to dismiss. Göbekli Tepe proved that monumental architecture existed thousands of years earlier than the standard timeline allows. Underwater structures off the coasts of India and Japan suggest settlements once existed in regions now submerged under hundreds of feet of water. Regions that were dry land before the end of the Ice Age. Climate science has confirmed the period between 12,000 and 10,000 years ago involved planetary-scale catastrophe, rapid flooding, temperature swings, widespread species extinction, environmental destruction on a scale that would have erased almost everything. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, supported by a growing body of geological evidence, proposes that Earth was struck by fragments of a comet approximately 12,800 years ago. Massive fires, flooding from destabilized ice sheets, atmospheric disruption, the kind of event that would end a civilization and leave almost no physical trace. Göbekli Tepe was built right at the edge of that window, and then it was deliberately buried. Not abandoned, buried. Someone filled it in with rubble on purpose, as if they were trying to protect it, or hide it, or preserve it for someone who came later. In this theory, the beings depicted carrying the handbag were the survivors of what came before. They were real people. They had real technology. They crossed the oceans because every coastal city they had ever built was now underwater. They arrived in different regions, in Mesopotamia, in Mesoamerica, in the Pacific, and they were met the way any technologically advanced group would be met by populations living without those advantages. They were called gods. They taught what they knew. They built what they could. They were remembered everywhere they went as beings who came from the sea, or descended from the sky, or survived the Great Flood. And they carried with them, always, the object that held whatever they had managed to save from the world that was destroyed. The Apkallu, Oans, Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, the Maori basket carriers, the Egyptian gods with their ankhs. They might all be memories of the same people, the same group. The last inheritance of a civilization we have not yet found and may never fully recover. Mainstream archaeology does not accept this. Accepting it would mean the human story is older, more complex, and more cyclical than the model allows. It would mean evidence is missing, not because it never existed, but because it is buried under the ocean, or beneath sites we have not yet excavated, or preserved in myths we have spent centuries treating as fiction. But the anomalies keep accumulating. Göbekli Tepe should not exist. It does. Sumerian civilization appears too suddenly, too completely, with too little developmental trail. Ancient texts describe technologies with a specificity that is inconsistent with pure mythology, and the same symbol appears, repeated, precise, across cultures that had no reason to share it. At some point, the weight of anomalies becomes too heavy for the standard model to hold. And this is where the mystery becomes something more than academic. If the handbag represented technology from a civilization that existed before ours, and that civilization was destroyed, the question that follows is the one no one wants to ask. Was the technology in the bag connected to what destroyed them? The Younger Dryas impact may not have been purely natural. The geological evidence is still debated, but ancient myths from cultures across the globe describe the destruction of previous worlds in language that is specific enough to be uncomfortable. Fire from the sky, waters that covered everything. A world that ended not because of nature, but because something went wrong. The myths also describe what survived. A boat, a container, a small group with the knowledge to start over, and in their hands, always, something they protected above everything else. What if the last act of a dying civilization was not to escape, but to record, to carry forward, in the safest possible vessel, the knowledge of what they had built and what had destroyed them? The handbag stays closed in every carving, not because the image is incomplete, because what was inside was not meant to be opened again lightly. The beings who carried it rebuilt civilization after a catastrophe. They taught everything needed to restart, and then, gradually, they disappeared. The symbol faded. The knowledge they carried was either lost or hidden, or locked inside religious traditions that quietly buried the origin story beneath layers of newer mythology. The deliberate concealment has its own pattern. Libraries burned, texts destroyed, traditions that credited civilization's origins to beings outside the approved theological framework were systematically erased as organized religion consolidated its hold on history. The handbag story was dangerous to any authority that needed humanity to believe knowledge came from one approved divine source. But the stone survived. Stone always survives, and carved into it, across 12,000 years and 3 continents, is the same closed bag, held by the same beings, in the same careful grip. We may never know with certainty what was inside. The objects themselves, if they were ever physical, are gone. What remains are images and myths, and the stubborn persistence of a symbol that refuses to be explained away. But the question is not a relic. It is not an archaeological curiosity from a world that no longer applies to ours. We are building technologies right now that our ancestors could not have imagined. Artificial intelligence that improves itself. Genetic tools capable of rewriting the human body. Energy sources that could power civilization or end it. Every one of these capabilities comes with consequences we cannot fully predict and cannot take back once they exist in the world. The civilization before us, if it existed, faced something similar, and the only thing it left behind was a closed bag in the hands of its survivors, carved into stone so that someone, someday, would ask the question. The symbol at Göbekli Tepe was buried deliberately, preserved, protected, as if whoever put it there believed someone would eventually dig it up and need to understand what it meant. We dug it up. We are still trying to understand what it means. And given what the answer might say about the pattern we are currently repeating, the urgency of that question is not something that can wait for the next archaeological dig. 12,000 years ago, a bag was carried through the end of the world. We still do not know what was inside it. We should probably find out. So, after everything, what do you think was inside that bag? Seeds for a world that needed to start over? A power source from a civilization we have not found yet? Genetic material that explains what we actually are? Or a warning, sealed and carried across catastrophe, waiting for someone advanced enough to understand it and wise enough not to repeat the mistake? Drop your theory in the comments, because the most unsettling possibility of all is the simplest one. The answer is already carved in the stone. We just forgot how to read it.